Hey. I can't hear you at all. You're muted. That's why I can't hear you.
Okay, there we
Okay.
go.
I was like, oh my darn, my new computer's not working.
Well, my desktop wasn't working. It's been crazy.
Yeah, I just saw your email. I was like listening to the other lecture on my phone. So I guess, and it's still going on. The Zoom for that is still going
Yeah,
on.
yeah, it's
So
weird.
I didn't see your text until I was just kind of like, I don't know what happened. And I was like, oh no. So I sent it.
Yep, thank you. Because
Yeah,
I
no
tried sending it earlier. This was my office last night, how I left it. I was like, I hope it doesn't catch on fire because the surge protector, I had no phone, no thing. So I got this extension cord. It's
Oh my
crazy.
gosh.
Luckily, the office didn't burn down. I was like, wait, I had no phone, no internet. But we're good. Should I try to share screen so that we'll see if I can, okay. You've
What's going on?
disabled,
I
it
did.
says host disabled.
Um,
So you gotta go to settings or more and then
Try that now.
share screen. Okay, and share. And there you go.
Okay, great.
Okay, so we'll stop share. Okay.
And do you want me to introduce you, Kavita, or will other people be joining us to introduce you?
No, I mean, you don't have to introduce me. I can introduce myself. If you want to introduce, you can. We can say you can say America since you're hosting, and I don't know if any of the board members will be here. Theoretically,
Well, it's being recorded.
Are you
So
recording already?
it's recording.
Okay, let's wait. Stop recording. Start recording again. Okay. Hang on, guys. Slight technical problems. Okay, there we are. That was the presentation. Very fast. Let's do, okay. Whenever you're ready, if you want to, I think I should just start. Okay. Thank you for joining me today. And what we're going to talk about is how to become a fellow of COVD. As I mentioned before, I'm Kavita Malhotra, and this is Mary Green, who is hosting it as well. We're co-chairs of the fellowship committee. So why should you become a fellow? Because you want board certified, you want to write FCOVD after your name, you want to get referrals from other professionals. And usually when I'm referring to somebody, I look to see if they're a fellow because it tells me they know what they know. It's also a great opportunity to give back, to really be a mentor and help others. And I think that's a very rewarding experience. You can also help your therapists become certified, because if you're not a fellow, they cannot be. Or of course, your goal could be president of COVD. It's always good to aim high. But more than anything else, it's a growth opportunity for you. It's figuring out what your model of vision is, what your approach is, really learning in depth as to how you are working with patients, what your framework is, and then being able to kind of delve deeper into it. And it's that personal satisfaction more than anything else that I think in the end will be, for most people, the most rewarding thing. For a couple of people, might be becoming president. So what do you have to do? There are steps. There's, of course, an application, and there's a certification guide, and it is on COVD's website. And I recommend that you get that and you download it. You have to submit, along with the application, your CV. So if you haven't written up a CV in a while, brush it up. There are fees, of course. The other thing is to be aware of deadlines. We do send reminders, but it's good for you to, in your whatever way you're keep track of time and things, have the deadlines in mind so that you can finish the process in a timely way. And then download the study material. There is a lot of study material. I know in my batch, I was the only person who read through all the study material. Mary said she read everything. Most people don't read everything. I recommend you read it, only because even if you're doing it after, it really gives you a deeper sense in terms of what's going on. But that's just me. It doesn't have to be you. There are minimum requirements in order for you to be able to apply for being a fellow. you have to have documented experience that you are experienced in vision therapy as well as vision development. You've completed at least 3 years of postgraduate clinical work, and that if you did a residency, it counts towards the 3 years. You've involved in direct clinical diagnosis and management of office-based vision therapy in your practice for 2 years over a minimum of 1,000 hours. There are continuing education requirements, at least 100 hours of CE within the past 5 years prior to applying. And that CE can include areas of vision development, binocular vision, visual information processing, as well as vision therapy. You can have formal CE courses up to 100 hours, but you can also do independent study up to 30 hours. And so if you are studying for, and you've downloaded all of that study material that they told you to, then you're reviewing it, that can count. You can also go to a study group. And this is a great opportunity at COVD to find people, even if they're not in your area, you can form a study group. We have a local one, IBO, that we're rotating through office. Sometimes it was in Jeff Kraskin's or Mary's office or my office, and we'd rotate through it. But now we've been doing through Zoom, and we have very productive discussions, and it's really great. So I recommend that. Find like-minded or actually unlike-minded people who are willing to talk. Good to have strengths in different areas and just form a study group. I highly recommend that. What else counts? If you've did a residency in pediatric or a rehab residency, and if you've done other skills that add to your knowledge base, you can count them in, and then it can be determined if it'll count or not, but certainly write them out. So how much time do you have to complete the process? You have 4 years from when you apply, and there are deadlines. So make sure you're responsible and you submit the material in time as well as the fees prior to the deadline. International candidates, and I know there are people from all over the world joining us at COVD, have an additional 2 years, and you can apply for additional time. So where do you start? So you've got the application, you've paid your fees, you downloaded the study material. What next? You can choose a mentor. And the mentor has to be someone who's a fellow of COVD. It cannot be someone who's on the exam board. And ideally, you get somebody who's mentored before or someone who's just finished the process. And this is where the committee that Mary and I are on helps you. We find a match. I usually send a couple of questions like, did you do a residency or not? Where do you live? Some people like things in the same time zone. Some others don't care. Sometimes mentors like people in certain time zone. What are your strengths, weaknesses, so that I can find a match that complements you. And you can have more than one mentor. Sometimes life happens and you're not able to get in touch with a mentor or find it's not clicking. Feel free to email back and say, look, I want another mentor. Just when you're submitting something, one mentor has to be a primary, because all the submissions that you're sending in have to have the approval of a mentor before they will be reviewed by the exam board. So do you have to have a mentor? Yes. I don't have to, or Mary doesn't have to be, the committee doesn't have to be the one finding it. If you find somebody on your own that you think would work well and they have time to help you, that's certainly fine. Just let us know so we can put it in our spreadsheet that know that you have a mentor, and we're not have to go through that for you. And as I said, the mentor is a resource that helps you go through the process. All your submissions are sent to them, and it's another set of eyes. So you need to give them enough time. I've had, when I was mentoring, somebody sent things at 4 a.m. and said, okay, the deadline is today. I did that once. I stayed up all night. And then the second time when they did that, I was like, no, you gotta just send it in time. I'm not pulling another all-nighter for you because you couldn't get things in time, right? So it's not fair also in terms of the quality of feedback you're going to get. If you give that person very little time and your mentor doesn't really have time to give you critical feedback, then you're not gonna be able to turn around and change and improve and send it back to the mentor to read again and go back. So usually say at least 3 weeks before the deadline. So you have time for a couple back and forth. So what you're submitting to the exam board is the best quality of work and really reflects what you know and understand or are practicing. Where do you find this stuff? If you go to COVD and under fellowship, it has the deadline, the timeline, and it has the material, the certification guide. If you're in academia and want the FCOVD-A, then there's a separate application and certification guide. So what does the process involve beyond the application and the fees and finding the mentor? There are open book questions, and there are 6 of them that you have to write up. And case reports, the 3 case reports. There's a multiple choice test. It's a 100-question test. And then there's an oral interview. So we'll get into each of these a little bit more. And of course, there's the banquet. That's when you get inducted, you take your oath, and then everybody shakes your hands. I don't know if they'll still do shaking hands, but we certainly hope we'll be in an environment where at least you can shake hands and congratulate you for making through this process. So the open book questions, there's several aspects. One, the first question is on accommodative abnormalities in binocular vision, strab amblyopia, visual information processing, the effect of lenses and prism, and the model of vision. You have 1 to 5 pages, double spaced. And as I said, give your mentor at least 3 weeks to review it so that you can get appropriate feedback. So this is question 1. I just put in a couple questions. I didn't write all of them out, so you just get a feel for it. So as you're reading it, it's looking really from a developmental and behavioral perspective, right? So it's different than if you were doing without that developmental perspective. So they're looking to see how would you discuss in your tests and treatment of accommodative abnormalities. This may include accommodative insufficiency in facility, lack of sustainability in excess, discuss how you decide if lenses, prisms, or vision therapy are indicated, and outline your treatment plan. Remember, it's a limited space, so you want to distill your thoughts, and that's why it's helpful to kind of write through it and then go back and read it again. So question 5, I thought I'd skip a couple of the questions in between, is discuss the application of lenses and prisms beyond refraction and prismatic compensation. Include the influence of lenses and prism on visual stress, visual behavior, visual development, and in vision therapy rehabilitation. So if someone was a +2 and you prescribed a +2, then that's more of a compensating lens. So that's not the type of patient that they're looking for. And if you have any questions, you can always check with your mentor before you start writing it up. So open book, the question 6 is describe your model vision and how it is derived. Include in it your definition of vision and your understanding of the relationship between developmental milestones, behavior, and performance. When writing this, just keep in mind your model of vision doesn't have to be somebody else's model of vision, including that of your mentor. You just have to be able to explain it and be able to show that you understand what your model is and how you use it with patients, both in your evaluation as well as in your therapy, and how it drives your overall perception of vision. So for the case reports, you're expected to present the case and then self-critique, so that now that you have all this other knowledge, and it's been a bit since you saw this patient, if you would do things differently, make sure you include that. So the first case is strabismus. Has to be a constant strabismic patient. So if this patient was intermittent, you cannot include that. So it's got to be, so if this patient has esotropia, but they have a centration point, that's different. But if it is an intermittent esotrope at distance, then it won't count. So just keep that in mind. Visual information processing must include vision therapy, and then lens treatment cannot include vision therapy. So if you're a student, or if you're earlier on and you're looking to see if this is something I want to do, and you see a patient with strabismus or one of these, then maybe you might say, okay, I might use this patient for my case write-up. So I might do a couple tests that I wouldn't normally do, so that you have a more robust data set that you can then analyze and then use. That might help you also figure out where you want to go with them in the therapy. If you have published case reports, you can use that as a substitution for one of the case. The exam board will decide whether or not it is acceptable and meets the requirements. So just make sure you check in time for that, so that if it gets said no, that you don't run out of time for it. The multiple choice exam, it's 100 questions. You can either take it before the annual meeting, or that you can take it at the annual meetings. Usually it's that Monday before the meeting. It's there are deadlines if you wanted to take it in, let's say, in January, when it's you can take it wherever in your area. There is a deadline in December, and I will mention that. For residents, it's typically, there's a date in June. So what does the MCE cover? There are specific topics, and in the candidate guide, it has the breakdown as to what percentage the questions will be from each of these areas. So it's a good thing to kind of look at that and say, okay, I looked at this list, I'm not so comfortable with whatever area. Maybe I delve deeper into that and go through that and do more readings in that area so that you are more comfortable. The oral interview, it is not a grilling. It's, think of it as a conversation. So when you submit your open book and your case reports, you will get feedback from the exam board. They'll give you a list of questions to think about this. Some of them might be rewrites that you have to write things back, but even at the end, they'll give you questions. Review them, right? So sometimes you've written your case reports and your open book a while ago, and now it's year 2 or it's been a bit. Make sure that you go back and look through those questions that they sent, and that you answer them and make sure that you are comfortable with what your responses are. And if what you would say is different than what you wrote before, make sure you're comfortable explaining that as well. So really think of it, couple friends, you're just having a conversation. The oral interview, it's, as I mentioned, the questions are related to comments you received, but sometimes if you bring up another topic in your answer, they might go a little bit in that direction. So be comfortable answering, and it's okay to take a breath and think, and then answer the questions. So here's some tips and survival guides. So make sure you look at the guidelines, and there is an updated version, and it is, a new one might come out in May. So keep checking the website, and it's your responsibility to check the website if any timelines change. Be concise, ask your mentor for help, and give your mentor plenty of time to review your work, right? So you want to make sure that you get that appropriate feedback. And you might want to check with your mentor to make sure that they've submitted their approval. As I said, sometimes life happens, so you send them a, hey, just checking. Just send them a nice email. Don't forget that study material. When you get comments back from the exam board, don't take it personally. Like, I remember when I got it, and there was one question on accommodation, and I thought I'd like answered everything from MEM, and they want to know the book and thing. I'd run the whole thing. And I remember going to Mitch Scheiman's office. I'm like, Mitch, I can't believe they're asking me this. And he's like, okay, so you want to just give up, or you want to answer and keep going with the process? I'm like, of course I'm going to answer. He's like, okay, well, here's this. Read these articles, read this book, and then write an answer. And I was like, okay, I'll do that. And so the idea is to being, you take them in a positive light. They're looking to see if they didn't quite get something. It's a clarification, but it's also something for you to maybe review before the orals, so you can get that and get that concept and have it flow. As you're reviewing the things, you may realize that there are things you know and things you don't know, but sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And so it's not a very comfortable feeling for some people, but it's okay, right? Because the whole point of this is to grow. It's that personal growth. Remember that goal as to why we're doing this. And so don't get overwhelmed, just keep going forward. Some more, like rules and tips. So set up your own personal timeline and stick to it. So if it helps you to have Post-it notes all over, they make great peripheral targets all around your computer to keep you also on track. I have a bunch of my patients doing that. feel free to submit things before the deadline. The material has to be submitted by the deadline. So if you're a day late, then there are no real exceptions for this. So there are no exceptions. You kind of, because we give you enough time, right? So that you really want it to be so that you can complete it successfully, keeping on time and keeping the process rolling, right? So that's why those deadlines are there. And for more details on if there are any changes on that, you can always email Katie and look at the new website, new candidate guide on the website. So the upcoming deadlines, Mary, I think there are some people in the waiting to come in. So in the deadline, the first one is the June 14th, and that's 3 or more open book questions. You don't have to do them in order. So you can pick the questions that are easiest for you or you feel you have a better handle on. And sometimes as you're looking at the questions, it's hard to come up with an answer. So you can just think of like, what is accommodation? What does it mean to you? Just top 10 words in your mind or top 5 words. You can always expand on it. Sometimes looking at that blank sheet of paper is much harder than just putting things down, and then you can always fine tune it and delve deeper and explain more. The next deadline after that is August 23rd, and that's the remaining open book questions. You can work on them ahead of time, so you don't have to wait till the first deadline passes before you start working on it, but that's when it's due, so make sure you get it submitted. And so that means 3 weeks before that is your personal deadline to send it to the mentor. October 29th is when all the case reports are due. December 17th is the last day to register for the January MCE. And this is what I'd mentioned before. So you have to keep in mind, and what happens is it often falls in the holiday season. So depending on what you're celebrating, so make sure you have your deadline in. You don't have to wait till the last day to register, but just keep that in mind. January 10th is 10 to 14. You can schedule a location in your area, and there are specific locations that you can have, and the criteria that they have to meet. And the March 4th is the deadline for submission for all revisions. So if they ask you for a revision, you make sure you get it in by then. And so the April 4th is the MCE at the annual meeting. And next year, the meeting is in Columbus, Ohio. And so we'll see you there. And the oral interviews will be right before the meeting starts, April 4th to 6th. So if there are revisions, you're going to take it in a good heart and answer them. You have 2 weeks to answer them. So make sure you stick with that deadline. They're very specific questions. So you don't have to rewrite the whole answer. Just answer their question. And you submit it to your mentor. They'll review it and then submit it back. And it'll have the same way that you did it initially. For residents, the June 5th to 7th is the MCE for the current residents. The test is valid for 5 years, so keep track of that. So if you're applying much later, if it goes past 5 years, then you'll have to take it again. There should be a letter sent from COVD to residency supervisors, directors, and you can also contact the COVD National Resident Liaison. And again, keep watching for changes. For residents who take the test during their residency, you have to submit the application fee before you can get a mentor. And so you can work on the stuff on your own, but you'll have to submit the application fee and start the ball rolling. And just remember that you won't be able to sit for the oral interviews until you have that 3 years of experience. So if you did your residency in 2018, then you could take the exam that June, or you would have taken it already. And you began working in June of 2018. You became eligible June of 2020. And so this year, this meeting would be when you would be first eligible to do the oral interview. So you can, and they'll post this. This is from the candidate guide, and you can see if you're doing a residency now, what the dates would be for you. So if you are doing the oral interviews or you already did them this year, there was an exception made because it was hard to find locations. So for this year only, you can do the take the MCE after the orals, but you won't be certified, won't get your certification until you pass that. And this was just, as we all know, it's been just a crazy year, and but don't count on those changes happening before for next year. So make sure that you try and take it before. There is an automated system coming, and I think the plan is to have it for this 1st June deadline. So be inspired and read the COVD blog. There's a bunch of people's stories as to why they decided to do the fellowship. And it's good to see like everyone's journey. It's not the same, but you can still make it. But if you see roadblocks, danger, ask for help. I like going for walks. And these are pictures from a trail near my office. Patients canceled and I end up taking these pictures. So we'll help you find the path. It might not be a straight and narrow, it might take a little winding road, but you'll get there. And don't let obstacles get you, right? You can do this. There's steps to it. We're here to help you. So what are you waiting for? And this is our email, and feel free to reach out to us. I'll hang on to this for one more second, and then I'll stop sharing. You can always Google us.
Thank you so much, Kavita. There's no one else in the country named Mehnaz Green, so but yeah, absolutely, you can definitely find us. Let's open it up for questions. Thank you so much, Kavita. That was very helpful. There was a bunch of questions. Thank you, Christy. Chris is a member of the board. Thank you for answering those. One of the things that we really want to remind you is that to download the certification guide. And that will give you all of the specifics of how many pages, what font, the spacing, all of those pieces. So I know that was a question that was coming up. That's one thing to consider. Any questions? If you have a question, please feel free to unmute yourself. No questions? Kavita, you're that good.
I could ask a question. Do you sort of say what are the best things to study for the multiple choice exam?
So there is a breakdown, right, of how many questions in each area. So as you look at those areas, I would review, well, that's just me. I review all the stuff. But if you find that some things are a little bit not as strong, then you can read those other sources. But if you need other material, right, because you're not sure or it didn't make sense, some people, you just need to hear it from another perspective, right? So whether it's articles or things, reach out and ask. Right? There are lots of sources, and we can give you material if you reach out to the Road to Fellowship Committee and ask to say, look, this didn't make sense, or I've been doing this one way all along, but this other thing, so we'll happy to direct you where to get it.
I had a question.
Sure.
The case report fee I know is due in June. Is it recommended that the first case be submitted then, or is it recommended that all the open book questions are done before the cases?
So if the deadline for the fees is June, then you get to submit the fees by then. But the deadline for the case reports comes later, and the open book comes earlier, right? So the deadline for the first open book questions. So you need to make sure you have the open book questions ready and the fees for that paid in, and the application fee. And if you have any questions, I don't know if Lauren's going to take over, but for right now, I put Katie's email. So wait a couple days after the meeting. Don't email her right away. She's just while we're running the meeting.
But feel free to email us. We'll try to help as much as we can with that process, and we'll get things double checked if we don't know. It's a process, and I'll just tell you my personal journey is when I started, I thought I've been doing vision therapy for 5 years, and I feel like I will ace this and it'll be easy. And life just happened. I had children, things. But so those deadlines are important. But sometimes I learned as a clinician as I went through this process. So it really made me question the way that I was practicing. And even if I was really confident with what I was doing, it really helped my knowledge base to understand what others might be feeling too. So like Kavita was saying, if you look at the recommended study list for the multiple choice exams, and you're not familiar with some of those things, those are the ones that you want to take a look at. And that's part of the process. Even if you feel like you're very successful and you want to continue practicing the way that you are, it's such a wonderful journey to understand other perspectives of what other people are seeing, and what might be something that might be beneficial for some of your patients you might not have thought about before.
And that's true for not just the therapy aspect, but also like how you're prescribing. So as you read through, it's like, oh yeah, maybe for this patient, I might think of doing it this way, just keeping in mind how they develop, right? Or there were some things that you noticed, or as you're reading on some of the child development, oh, maybe next time I'll ask this question as part of my history. So you'll see that it'll be reflected in how you're not just in your approach to patient and how you're thinking about it. And it's funny, like you'll go out and you'll, like what would be a kid's game, like they're playing baseball, and I'll look at somebody, I'm like, I wonder. And you're tempted to say something, but then you don't, because you're like, okay, they don't really want their personal information. That comes from being able to read and be comfortable and just observing, right? So we do so much of that. So it's kind of different aspects of it. So, and whether it's patients with strabismus, amblyopia, I think that ends up being, and Christy can sort of like the sticking point. So for some people, because they just don't have that patient base, so they but really need to kind of get more comfortable with that, right? So both in terms of what you would do with them and the testing. And so if you see somebody with that, make sure you kind of go through a thorough battery. Christy, not to put you on the spot, but you want to say anything, unmute and say anything?
Kavita, you did a great job just going through all the details. I think I don't need to add anything. I think the only comment I would have is that as you guys both mentioned, the new guide will come out within a few weeks. There are no major changes that we have voted on for this year. The one that I put in the chat was that we found that when we accepted already published case reports, that there were a lot of questions that the reviewers would have, that maybe the data wasn't completely published in the report and we were asking a lot of questions. So we actually took that out, and we just want you to rewrite up, even if you use that same case, just rewrite up the data in the format that is written. That's the only change that we foresee for the guide. And I don't believe there's any fee change for the fellows this year as well.
Okay. And there is very specific guide on how to write up the case reports. And when you're submitting it, there you'll get candidate numbers, so that all the reviewers are blinded. They don't know who you are. And so make sure you keep that format so that they don't, it's also in terms of how the write-up is, in terms of history, things, findings, to just follow that guideline and just explain if something didn't work out, or there was a test you would do differently, then certainly put that in, especially as you've gone through and studied more, and maybe you saw the patient a while ago, like earlier in your career.
That's a really good point about the candidate number, that it's a blinded process. So as you're going through it, don't feel bad if you're new, or if you've been doing this a long time, or you're just feeling a little embarrassed. The reviewers don't know who you are.
The exam board only finds out who you are when it's time for the oral interview. So
And I think one other point for the cases as well, like it doesn't have to be like a perfect case. It doesn't have to be a case that you just had, you know, this last coming year right before you did your fellowship. Say you're 10, 15 years out in practice and you have a case that qualifies that you want to use from 10 years ago, but it's not stellar. But that's what the discussion piece is for. This is what I would do differently now. This is what I would do differently as far as techniques for this patient. Perhaps I would get a better outcome in this area if I use this set of techniques or if I use this different approach. Because like Kavita and Mary both said, like it's about learning and growth, and we change so much and we learn so much year by year. That again, it doesn't have to be perfect, and it doesn't have to be the strab that's now, you know, and 10 diopter exophore or whatever. It just has to show that you learn and you grow. And then if we ask you questions about it, you have knowledge in that area.
So Chris is right in that it doesn't have to be that they have 20 seconds of arc stereo if they started out. If you saw some change or something, to make sure you write that documented. And if the patient noticed anything different, make sure you put that in as well. So not just from your findings, certainly function-wise, if there was an improvement there. Okay, and anything else? Any other questions?
I like to just support what Kavita was saying about getting it done early, not just finishing it at, you know, I'm a procrastinator myself, but probably that's why it took me 5 years to get through it. But you really want to get it done early. One is that you write it all out and then you go back and you edit it with a new set of eyes. And if you have done any writing or publishing, that's so important. You don't want your mentor to be proofreading your work. You want to make sure that you're sending work that is not going to be proofread. This should be capitalized. This is spelled wrong. That's not what your mentor is for. Remember, your mentor is volunteering to do this. So they're working, they're a knowledgeable person. They have life commitments too. So make sure that you're using their time wisely. So make sure that you've proofread, that what you're sending to your mentor is your best work. And really that's by allowing plenty of time for yourself, and then giving your mentor, like Kavita was saying, 3 weeks, so that they're not going to get all your work. Maybe they're going to be like Kavita and get it all done immediately, but they are going to need to fit that into their life too, to review that. And then you want to be able to get that sent back and work on different areas if you need to.
And also recommend use spell check. It doesn't pick up all the terms, but sometimes the simple things will trip, and it's like you read any paper, right? And you see all those, it kind of throws your rhythm off. And if you're writing it out, see if you can read it out loud to see if it sounds and flows. So just like you would write any paper in college, so that and then make sure you have the correct names for tests. Sometimes, especially for therapy, I think there are 100 names for like the same therapy procedure. Like somebody was reading, they said chapters. I'm like, what's chapters? And chapters turns out to be chalkboard circles and angels. I'm like, wait, I never thought of that name. So either be descriptive or like describe it somewhat more, or just use a terminology that's more standard, right? So that if you learned it from somebody else, then just so that they understand you're speaking with common language.
Absolutely. And I was a mentor once to someone that was an international candidate. And so sometimes there were some language pieces that were in there that were different. And actually, I loved it. I thought it was really interesting because of the different ways that they were describing things that were familiar to me too. But yeah, again, having enough time to making sure that they're able to look at that and have a conversation with you about it.
How many people here are residents? If you want to raise hand or something, or you can put in the chat. And so we got a couple. And how many people have been practicing for, thank you, for at least 3 years? Like I'm trying to get a sense in terms of, okay, feel free to turn your cameras. Very good. Okay, so if you are looking to see, okay, where am I in the process, then you can see there are people at all stages, and you don't have to have a certain amount of time to kind of, in your mind, you could say, okay, I want to get it ready for next year. But if you end up needing a little time or something happens, there's a hiccup, it's not the end of the world, right? You're doing this for you. You're doing this for your satisfaction. And even if it means delaying being president of COVD another year, that's okay. You'll get through this, right? And so just take it one step at a time, have your timeline, and ask questions, and we'll be happy to help you.
I know Arusha has a question. Are there deadlines for residents to refer to if we take the MC exam on June 5th to 7th? So if you take the multiple choice exam in June, then you follow the deadline that's in the guide.
So you can work on those questions and open book questions, and if you have case, you could write them up, but you're not eligible to kind of sit through until you've had 3 years. After the residency finishes, you'll have to work for 2 more years before you will become eligible to kind of take that. So in that last year, you can look at applying then. But feel free to read stuff, make notes, answer the questions. As I said, if you see a patient that you think would work, then write that up.
And you have 5 years for that multiple choice exam.
And if something happens and you don't pass the test, you can take it again. So
I think there'll be a fee, just to let everyone know. There's
I
always
think
a
you'll have
fee.
like one retake. Yeah. The case reports, there's a question from Arisha, case reports and open book be due in summer. So it'll be that summer for when you're eligible, right? Because if you just took the MC this summer, if you're taking it this June, then you have to wait a bit before you can actually submit it. I don't know the pass rate, but I can find out and let you know. I think most people end up passing. I don't know if Christy has any other sense.
Yeah, we don't publish pass rates or actually pass scores or anything like that, but the pass rate is very high for those who take it. I don't even know the exact number, but it's definitely like above 70 to 80% most times, sometimes higher than that.
So here's another question. For the case reports that require VT as part of the treatment, do you need to be the one doing the therapy or just the overseeing doctor?
So there's nothing in our book that says it's mandatory that you are the doctor doing the treatment. Definitely that would be the best scenario, is that you were the doctor doing the treatment. If you're not the doctor doing the treatment, or you have a therapist, if you're overseeing, that would be ideal. What the cases we don't really like getting are the ones where maybe you had them in your residency, or you had them as a student and you only saw the patient for 2 months and someone else did the actual bulk of the care of the patient. We'd rather not see a case like that, because we want to be able to ask you questions about your rationale for treatment and what you did when the patient responded this way, and you wouldn't be able to really answer those questions that we would have.
That's a good question. Any other? It's great. And again, keep checking, check in May for the new candidate guide, and if there are any changes with the timelines, so that you can keep track. And if, let's say, you're not doing this in time for next year, then if there's a different deadline for some things, you just make sure you keep that in play. So even if you start the process and something happens, then the actual date, they'll still be due in somewhat the same order, but let's say you get your open book questions in but not able to get the case reports, then you have to follow the case report deadlines for next year. We're happy to take questions. I'm happy to do this. I love being on this committee, and I think it's been very rewarding. And I hope once you are mentors, once you are fellows, you will mentor other people and kind of keep the ball rolling. This is how we make our, not just our organization grow, but really make our community better, because we're reaching out to more people this way.
I have a question.
Sure.
For other fellowship processes like the FAAO, etc., they ask for your case reports to be representative of like a standard patient in your office or something like that, so that your treatment is very much the way you would treat anybody else. Is that kind of a similar thought process with these, or do you want like a zebra case that you treated? Can you use one of those?
Especially for patients with the strabismus amblyopia, there are, for the strabismus patients, often it is just one of a kind. So if you don't have that many, use the one that you have. So I think use a patient that you think would work well, and then you can discuss your philosophy more so. So it doesn't mean that you treat everybody exactly the same way. I have an overarching philosophy in how I work with patients, but I don't prescribe the same plus the same way, or prism the same way for every patient. It's just because I find value X in my findings doesn't mean I'll prescribe Y, because I'm looking at symptoms Z and how they change in function X squared, right? So our patients are just different. So I think you need to kind of, I think it reflects your overall model more than anything than a standard routine you follow.
Thank you.
For Timothy's question that he just posed in the chat, do the case reports have to be cases we oversaw during the reporting year? Absolutely not. They can be from any point in your clinical career. You can pull those cases from.
The only caveat is you can't be a student. It has to be your clinical decision making. But you could be a resident or anytime in your clinical practice.
And that was Jen. Jen is on the exam board as well. And I think we have, I thought I saw Ilana's name at one point.
Ilana's son broke his thumb or finger. And so she dove out.
Hopefully.
Oh, no. I used an old case. I'm not sure why. Maybe I started writing it up before I had to take a break to have one of my kids. And I really enjoyed working with that case, because when you had to talk about like, how would you do things differently? I was like, I would do so many things differently. It was one of those earlier cases I had. So it doesn't have to be one that you're doing right now or just done this past year. And sometimes it's helpful to look back on some of those cases that you've worked with, but like what's been said, it has to be your patient that you saw as after graduation.
And if I've had a couple of times when people worked in a different practice and then moved on and they want to use a case from the previous practice. I hope you left on good terms, but if you reach out to them, sometimes they're willing to share stuff. So I think usually in the past they've been able to make it work. There's been some where they've been able to get the data. But if you're working somewhere and you think you might be leaving, then get the stuff that you need before you leave.
That's smart. I wouldn't have thought of that. Any other questions?
Well, it's been good. I was saying, Mary, if you want to stop recording, people can just ask questions if they feel uncomfortable with it while it's recording.